He wheezes, a rattling sound more akin to a death rattle than the breath of a god-king. Forget the gold, the lapis lazuli, the meticulously painted murals depicting glorious hunts and bountiful harvests. Here, in the shadowed corners of the palace, reality claws its way to the surface. 18 years old, Tutankhamun, Pharaoh of Egypt, struggles to lift the crook and flail, symbols of his divine authority. His sister wife, Ankhesenamun, a mirror image of his affliction, steadies his trembling arm. Their faces, elongated skulls, protruding teeth, tell the tale of generations of incest. Divine blood, they called it. Poison it has become. The air, thick with frankincense and fear, hides the stench of decay, of genetic rot. Forget the History Channel intros, the promises of hidden truths and forgotten stories. There is only the truth, ugly and stark. The king, a grotesque puppet, his jaw misaligned, forced to be spoon-fed like an infant. Seizures shake him, blamed on demonic possession by craven priests afraid to speak the truth. His withered left foot drags uselessly. DNA would later reveal full siblings as his parents, a genetic cocktail designed for suffering. Cleft palate, clubfoot, feminine hips, a spine twisted into an S, he must exert tremendous effort merely to stand. These were not tests of divinity, but a biological catastrophe unfolding on a golden throne. Royal incest, not born of perversion, but from a theological system gone mad. The Pharaoh, an earthly Horus, doomed to repeat the divine sibling marriages, Osiris and Isis, Set and Nephthys. To marry outside the bloodline was blasphemy, diluting the god blood, severing the connection to the divine realm, threatening the cosmic order itself. The earliest recorded royal sibling marriage, Pharaoh Jedefre and his sister Hetepheres II, around 2550 BC, a seed planted that would blossom into full-blown tragedy during the New Kingdom. The 18th dynasty, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, perfected sibling marriage, a political necessity to concentrate power, prevent rival families from seizing the throne. Creation myths justified it. Atum creating Shu and Tefnut through masturbation. Their children Geb and Nut mating. Pharaohs not just following tradition, but reliving the fundamental creation story of their civilization. To refuse was blasphemy. When Amenhotep I considered a Mitanni princess in 1400 BC, the high priests threatened to declare him unfit. His divine status depended on the purity of his bloodline, and any foreign contamination would sever his connection to the gods. Amenhotep III married his sister Sitamun, fathering Akhenaten, whose deformities forced a revolutionary shift in art, idealized forms unable to depict his reality. Akhenaten's reign, 1353 to 1336 BC, marked the genetic nadir. His religious reforms, abandoning the pantheon for Aten, a sun god, speculated to be the results of neurological damage from inbreeding. Elongated skull, feminine features, protruding, belly, abnormally long limbs, were a symptom of hormonal imbalances, his subjects questioning his divinity. Graffiti showed crude drawings of the pharaoh with exaggerated physical defects. The god-king walks like a woman and speaks like a child, one inscription read, treasonous words in a culture where questioning the pharaoh meant death. Akhenaten chose Nefertiti, likely his half-sister or cousin, beauty masking the genetic consequences of royal inbreeding. Cranial deformation, severe malocclusion, misaligned teeth were signs. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti birthed 6 daughters, and at least one son, Tutankhaten, later Tutankhamun, heir to an inheritance of genetic devastation. He was born with a combination of disorders that should have been impossible to survive in the ancient world. His very existence, a testament to the skill of Egyptian physicians who kept him alive despite his overwhelming biological disadvantages. The court physicians of the 18th dynasty developed treatments for each generation of pharaohs. Papyrus scrolls describing complex surgical procedures, attempts to correct cleft palates and club feet. The Edwin Smith papyrus from 1600 BC detailed neurological disorders matching the symptoms of inbred pharaohs. Egyptian physicians understood the connection between royal marriages and genetic disorders, even if they lacked modern scientific understanding. A papyrus from Amenhotep III described the curse of the godblood, noting that royal children often suffered from similar physical afflictions. A sophisticated classification system recognizing patterns that wouldn't be understood scientifically until the development of modern genetics. There is no need for clickbait, for filler or useless intros. Only the harsh, undeniable truth of a boy king crippled by tradition. Howard Carter's discovery in 1922 revealed a meticulously crafted lie, a mask of perfection hiding unimaginable suffering. Tutankhamun's skull showed signs of hydrocephalus, fluid accumulation in the brain causing headaches and cognitive impairment. His chest cavity was partially collapsed. Scoliosis made breathing difficult and painful. His left foot so deformed, over 100 walking sticks were buried with him, from simple canes to elaborate golden staffs to support his weight. Chemical analysis revealed a rushed embalming, his body badly damaged, possibly burned. His death was sudden and unexpected, despite his chronic health problems. The embalmer rushed to preserve his body, fearing his genetic disorders would manifest even in death. The boy king's death at 18 remains a mystery. A blow to the back of his head, perhaps fatal. Ribs broken in a pattern consistent with a chariot accident or a fall. High levels of antimony in his organs, poison common in ancient Egypt. Murdered, perhaps by courtiers tired of a weak king. His genetic vulnerabilities made him an easy target, succumbing to the political consequences of his heritage. But Tutankhamun's tragic story was just the beginning. The real genetic catastrophe unfolded centuries later with Alexander the Great's General Ptolemy I. Ptolemy the Maufa conquered Egypt in 305 BC, establishing a dynasty that made the pharaoh's sibling marriages look tame. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt from 305 to 30 BC, elevated royal incest to an art form. 15 generations of rulers married their sisters, brothers, daughters, nieces, their family tree a genetic spiral. They didn't just practice incest, they institutionalized it, creating the most closed royal marriage system in human history. Unlike the pharaohs, theological reasons were secondary. The Ptolemies, Macedonian Greeks ruling over conquered Egyptians, needed to maintain their ethnic identity while claiming legitimacy as pharaohs. Marrying within their family served both purposes, preserving their Greek bloodline while adopting the Egyptian royal tradition of sibling marriage. Ptolemy I, Alexander's trusted general, understood the delicate balance to rule Egypt. He married Berenice I, a Macedonian noblewoman, initially rejecting Egyptian incest, but later realizing the political advantages of closed marriages. His son, Ptolemy II, fully embraced the practice, setting a precedent for 3 centuries. Ptolemy II ruled from 283 to 246 BC, divorced his first wife, Arsinoe I, to marry his full sister, Arsinoe II. Not a political marriage or theological requirement, but a conscious choice to concentrate Ptolemaic blood in his heirs. The marriage was celebrated with elaborate ceremonies, combining Greek and Egyptian traditions, a new royal ritual repeated for generations. The marriage was remarkably successful politically. Arsinoe II, a skilled co-ruler, expanded Ptolemaic power throughout the Mediterranean. She was deified after her death, her cult becoming one of the most popular in the ancient world. The political success of this sibling marriage convinced subsequent Ptolemies that incest was necessary for dynastic survival. Ptolemaic commitment to sibling marriage was absolute, often marrying multiple siblings in succession. Ptolemy VII ruled from 170 to 116 BC, married his sister Cleopatra II, then after her death married her daughter Cleopatra III, his own niece. When Cleopatra III died, he married her daughter Cleopatra IV, uncle, stepfather, and husband to the same woman. These serial marriages were the norm, not the exception. The mathematical precision of Ptolemaic inbreeding is staggering. Geneticists calculated that by Cleopatra VII, the famous Cleopatra who seduced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, the royal family had been intermarrying so long that she had only 6 distinct ancestors in her family tree going back 5 generations. In a normal family tree, she would have had 32 distinct ancestors over the same period. The Ptolemies had reduced their genetic diversity to less than 20% of what it should have been. This genetic bottleneck, the result of careful planning by Ptolemaic rulers who viewed their bloodline as a precious resource to be conserved. Elaborate marriage contracts specified who could marry whom, how many children each couple should produce, and in what order. These contracts, preserved on papyrus scrolls, reveal a dynasty obsessed with genetic purity to the point of mathematical precision. This chapter refuses to sugarcoat the brutal truth of a dynasty obsessed with its own blood, even as it turned to poison. Forget flowery prose. Here is the stark reality of a family slowly destroying itself from within. The physical consequences of this genetic bottleneck were catastrophic. Ptolemaic rulers suffered from a constellation of disorders that grew worse with each generation. Contemporary accounts describe pharaohs with severe obesity, mental instability, physical deformities barely recognizable as human. The historian Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, described the Ptolemaic court as a menagerie of human monsters masquerading as gods. Ptolemy VI was so grotesquely fat that his subjects nicknamed him Physcon, meaning potbelly. His weight, estimated at over 400 pounds, made it impossible for him to walk unassisted. He required servants to move around his palace, his throne reinforced to support his bulk. Contemporary accounts describe him sweating constantly, breathing heavily, requiring frequent rest during even simple activities. The king's obesity was a symptom of a broader metabolic disorder affecting generations of Ptolemies. Modern geneticists have identified genetic mutations that could explain the dynasty's tendency toward extreme weight gain. These mutations also affected Ptolemaic fertility, making it difficult for them to produce healthy heirs, contributing to the dynasty's eventual extinction. The psychological effects of inbreeding were equally devastating. several Ptolemaic rulers showed signs of severe personality disorders. Ptolemy IV ruled from 221 to 204 BC, was described by contemporary historians as paranoid and sadistic. He murdered his mother, brother and uncle in a single purge, claiming they were plotting against him. He then married his sister, Arsinoe III, forcing her to participate in increasingly elaborate religious ceremonies described as divine madness. The king's paranoia became so severe that he refused to eat food that hadn't been tested by multiple tasters. He slept in a different room every night, employed a network of spies to monitor his own family members. His behavior became so erratic that his ministers questioned his sanity. One contemporary account describes him as a man possessed by demons of his own making. Ptolemy IV's mental instability may have been caused by temporal lobe epilepsy, resulting from genetic disorders common in inbred populations. The condition causes seizures manifesting as religious visions, paranoid delusions, and violent outbursts. Several other Ptolemaic rulers showed similar symptoms, suggesting this form of epilepsy was endemic in the royal bloodline. The court physicians of the Ptolemies became experts in managing the medical consequences of royal inbreeding. They developed elaborate treatments for each generation, special diets for the morbidly obese pharaohs, mechanical devices to help the physically deformed rulers walk, potions to calm the psychological disorders that made some rulers dangerous to themselves and others. These medical treatments were recorded in detail on papyrus scrolls, revealing the sophistication of Ptolemaic medicine. Physicians understood that royal genetic disorders were hereditary, even if they couldn't explain the mechanism of inheritance. They developed a system of medical surveillance, tracking the health of royal children from birth, identifying genetic problems early, and developing treatments to manage them. A detailed medical papyrus describes the treatment of Ptolemy Nam, who suffered from severe haemophilia, a genetic disorder that prevents blood from clotting properly. The physicians developed herbal treatments, dietary restrictions, and physical therapy designed to minimize the risk of bleeding. They also created specially designed clothing and furniture to protect the king from injuries that could prove fatal. But the physicians couldn't solve the fundamental problem. Each generation of Ptolemies was genetically weaker than the last. The dynasty's later rulers were increasingly dependent on their advisors, ministers, and foreign allies to maintain power. The royal bloodline that had once conquered Egypt was slowly destroying itself from within, creating a power vacuum that would ultimately be filled by Rome. The political consequences of Ptolemaic genetic decline were profound. As the pharaohs became physically and mentally weaker, real power shifted to court officials, military commanders, and foreign advisors. The traditional Egyptian system of divine kingship, which had maintained stability for over 3 millennia, began to collapse under the weight of genetic catastrophe. Forget the glorification of royalty. This is the agonizing decline of a dynasty undone by its own obsession. There is no elegance, no beauty, only the slow, agonizing decay of body and mind. The most famous victim of Ptolemaic inbreeding was also its most successful survivor, Cleopatra VII, who became pharaoh in 51 BC. Her parents were full siblings, her grandparents were full siblings, her great-grandparents were full siblings. By any biological measure, she should have been a genetic disaster. Instead, she became one of history's most formidable rulers. Cleopatra spoke 9 languages, was educated in mathematics and philosophy, and commanded the loyalty of one of the ancient world's most powerful armies. She negotiated treaties with Rome, managed Egypt's complex economy, and maintained the loyalty of her subjects despite the political chaos that surrounded her reign. But even Cleopatra couldn't escape the genetic burden of her ancestry. Historical accounts describe her as having an enlarged head, protruding teeth, and a masculine voice, all characteristic signs of inbreeding. Her intelligence and charisma masked physical deformities that would have been obvious to anyone who met her in person. Contemporary Roman sources describe her as physically repulsive but intellectually captivating. The Queen's famous beauty, celebrated in countless works of art and literature, was likely more propaganda than reality. The iconic image of Cleopatra as a stunning temptress was created by Roman poets and artists who wanted to explain how she had seduced their greatest leaders. The historical Cleopatra was probably a physically unattractive woman whose political skills and intellectual abilities made her irresistible to powerful men. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were political alliances disguised as romantic affairs. Caesar needed Egyptian grain and gold to fund his military campaigns, while Cleopatra needed Roman protection to maintain her throne. Their affair produced a son, Caesarion, who inherited his mother's intelligence, but also her genetic disadvantages. The boy grew up to be physically weak and mentally unstable, making him unsuitable to rule either Egypt or Rome. Mark Antony's relationship with Cleopatra was similarly pragmatic. The Roman general needed Egyptian resources to fund his war against Octavian, while Cleopatra needed Roman military support to maintain her power. Their alliance produced 3 children, all of whom showed signs of genetic disorders that would have made them unsuitable rulers. The end of the Ptolemaic dynasty came not from genetic collapse, but from military defeat. In 31 BC, Octavian's forces defeated Cleopatra and Mark Antony at the Battle of Actium. The battle was decided not by superior tactics or strategy, but by the defection of Cleopatra's fleet, whose commanders had grown tired of supporting a genetically compromised dynasty. Rather than face capture and the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as a trophy, Cleopatra chose suicide. She died on August 30th BC at the age of 39, ending a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. Her death marked the end of the last great experiment in royal incest, bringing to a close a genetic disaster that had spanned over a millennium. The aftermath of Cleopatra's death revealed the full extent of the Ptolemaic genetic catastrophe. Octavian's forces discovered that the royal treasury was nearly empty despite Egypt's vast wealth. The pharaohs' genetic disorders had made them incapable of effective governance, and their kingdom had slowly collapsed under the weight of mismanagement and neglect. The royal palaces were filled with evidence of the dynasty's decline. Rooms that had once hosted elaborate ceremonies were converted into medical facilities for treating royal genetic disorders. The famous Library of Alexandria, once the greatest centre of learning in the ancient world, had been allowed to decay as successive pharaohs became too mentally unstable to appreciate its value. With Cleopatra's death, the last great experiment in royal incest came to an end. The Ptolemies had proven that a genetically closed royal family could maintain power for centuries, but only at an enormous biological cost. Each generation had paid a higher price for the privilege of pure blood until finally the dynasty's greatest ruler chose death rather than witness the extinction of her line. There were Arminid Persian Empire, which ruled from 550 to 330 BC, the Seleucid Empire, which controlled much of the former Persian Empire after Alexander's death, also encouraged marriages between close relatives, but nowhere was the practice as systematic or as devastating as in Egypt. The Pharaohs and the Ptolemies created the most genetically closed royal bloodlines in human history, and their dynasties paid the ultimate price for this biological experiment. Their genetic disasters serve as a warning about the dangers of closed breeding systems and the importance of genetic diversity for human survival. The Roman physician Galen, who visited Alexandria in 162 with Dee, studied these records extensively and incorporated their findings into his own medical writings. However, even the Romans couldn't entirely escape the allure of royal incest. The Emperor Caligula, who ruled from 37 to 41 AD, was rumoured to have had incestuous relationships with his sisters. His erratic behaviour, which included declaring himself a god and appointing his horse as counsel, may have been influenced by the genetic disorders that ran in the Julio-Claudian bloodline. In their quest to become gods, the pharaohs had forgotten how to remain human, and in the end, that forgetting cost them everything. Their legacy lives on, not in the divine blood they sought to preserve, but in the cautionary tale they left behind. A warning about the price of genetic hubris that echoes across the millennia, as relevant today as it was 3,000 years ago in the shadow of the pyramids.